Reborn, I no longer fixate on having a soldier as my husband. Upon returning to life in the 20th century, I chose to list my sister's name on the marriage application. This time, my goal was to make David happy. In this incarnation, I was the one who handed my sister her wedding gown, placed the engagement ring on her finger, and orchestrated each of their encounters. He escorted my sister to Beijing, while I, without hesitation, moved to Shanghai to pursue my studies. In my previous life, I was already over 50, and he, along with my son, were pleading for a divorce, merely to allow him and my sister to achieve their destined union. Reborn into this existence, I aspired only to soar high without the worries of love. Just complete it and hand it over. David tapped the desk impatiently. I gazed at the marriage application, my fingers gently tracing the paper's rough edges as my mind wandered aimlessly. In my former life, I had filled out my name on this form as though it were a divine command. Later, with great enthusiasm, I dragged David to purchase wedding suites. Instead of gratitude, I received a reprimand, all because he was eager to return and prepare brown sugar water for Elena, who was menstruating. I responded half-heartedly. I know, I know. I glanced up at his impatient demeanor and the hand that kept checking the time. Today he wore a white shirt with sleeves rolled up to his elbows, showcasing his well-defined forearms. I recalled that Elena adored this appearance on him, saying it made him look clean and fresh. You proceed if you're busy. I forced a casual tone, suppressing my bitterness. I'll submit it once I'm done. He seemed somewhat relieved, his voice softening. Don't worry. Since we're getting married, I'll take responsibility for you, he said. But you shouldn't be jealous of Elena anymore. If others find out, it could tarnish her reputation. I fell silent. In my past life, I had explained this countless times. But to him, I was always the envious, petty sister who couldn't accept her gentle, kind-hearted younger sibling. He said nothing more and hastily left. Taking a deep breath, I attempted to quell the turmoil in my heart, but my mind incessantly replayed the events of my previous life. On our wedding night, he fabricated an excuse about caring for his ailing sister and didn't return home. When he was deployed with the army, he only took Elena, claiming she hadn't been to Beijing yet. Even on the day our son was born, David was too preoccupied comforting a divorced Elena. Just before his death, our son pleaded with me. Mom, just divorce Dad. You're nothing compared to Aunt Elena. Dad has suffered so much staying with you all these years. Let him go. I looked at my detached husband by the bedside, his silent demeanor confirming his thoughts. I bit my lip hard, and only when I tasted blood did I slowly release my grip. No, this time, I wouldn't repeat the same mistakes. Picking up the pen, I carefully wrote a single name in the applicant field, Elena. David, since you love her so much, then have it your way. I handed the completed application form to the staff, collected the marriage certificate, and exited the civil affairs office. I wasn't sad. Instead, I felt an indescribable sense of liberation. In my previous life, after our parents passed away due to work, Elena and I were adopted by the Zhang family. Elena was charming and eloquent, so the Zhangs treated her even better than their biological daughter. Mrs. Zhang had long schemed to marry Elena off to David. However, Elena, with a simple, I don't want to fight with my sister, made David willingly marry me. In reality, she merely wanted to keep David within reach, waiting for something better since David was only a company commander at the time. I attended the university, inquiring about necessary preparations and living expenses before returning home with peace of mind. Upon arriving at David's family residence, I had just stepped inside when I heard Elena's playful voice. David, if you return to be with me instead of your sister, will she be upset? It's fine. I can visit her anytime, but every time you come, you always get so close to her. I'm worried about you being alone at home. Elena smiled happily, then feigned sadness, saying, After you and my sister get married, will you still be good to me? Of course, David replied firmly. Who else would I be good to if not you? If your sister treats you badly, I'll divorce her. Clenching my fist tightly, I nearly lost control of my emotions. Even in this second life, hearing my husband speak so coldly still hurt. Composing myself, I suppressed the ache in my chest and entered the room as if nothing was wrong. David emerged from Elena's room with a hint of awkwardness on his face. I saw that Elena wasn't feeling well, so I went in to check on her, he explained. I gave a faint and turned to return to my room. In my previous life, I had argued with him countless times over his ambiguous behavior with them. This time, I didn't want to waste time or energy on it. He stopped me. Rita, how about we buy some wedding suites and distribute them to the wives in the staff quarters? I looked at him in surprise, then realized he must be trying to make amends since I wasn't causing a scene. No need. There's no point in these formalities. He was momentarily stunned, probably unable to fathom that I would actually decline his suggestion. Is it because you're upset that David is taking care of me? Elena walked out of the room, looking wronged and innocent. She wore the linen suit I had specifically bought for our wedding photos, the most popular outfit in the 1950s. I had saved for half a year to purchase it in my previous life, but never dared to wear it. Seeing my gaze, Elena quickly explained, I saw this outfit on your bed today and liked it, so I wanted to try it on. I forgot to take it off. She lowered her head, twirling her fingers, appearing like a child who had done something wrong. David instinctively said, Rita, don't. I interrupted him calmly. It looks good on you, so you can keep it. I never wore it anyway. I can still smell the faint traces of blood and sweat on the linen suit, and the memory of running home crying in the middle of the night floods back. Even now, it feels disgusting. In the surprised gazes of both of them, I returned to my room and locked the door. I took out my folder, which contained my acceptance letter to South City University. I had always liked the South, especially since the finance major there was exactly what I wanted. In my previous life, I had given up my studies for David, content to stay home and serve my in-laws. This time, I was fortunate to have the chance to live for myself. Glancing at the calendar, there were only 10 days left until I could leave this place. Time was tight, but I had to make the most of every moment to prepare. A knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. Annoyed, I opened it to find David standing there with a bowl of noodles. You must be hungry. I made you some noodles. For a moment, I felt a strange sense of nostalgia. In my past life, he was either cold and distant or harsh with his words. This warm, affectionate David was someone I hadn't seen in a long time. No thanks, I'll eat outside, I responded firmly. Impossible. You've always been too stingy to spend money, he remarked, his words stinging. I used to be frugal, saving every penny, spending most of my part-time earnings on him, buying him things. But now, as I was about to attend university, I had more expenses to consider, and every penny had to be carefully budgeted. I looked up at him calmly. I remember a few days ago, I gave you 50 yuan to buy wedding supplies. It seems you didn't purchase anything. Please return it to me. He froze for a moment, then awkwardly explained, That money? I used it to buy Elena some little leather shoes. I couldn't help but sneer. It's so meaningless, always the same thing. Well, never mind. I'm going to bed, I said, closing the door behind me. I'll give you the money tomorrow, he added, irritation evident in his voice. We're married. Do you really need to be so calculating? I couldn't help but snort. So it's okay for you to spend my hard-earned money on someone else. And I'm not even allowed to be upset about it? He knew he was wrong, but still muttered under his breath. Unreasonable. I couldn't be bothered to argue any longer and slammed the door shut. In the next few days, I sold off some of the worthless belongings around the house. Those keepsakes from my previous life, filled with memories. Looking at them now, they were just cheap junk. I packed them all up and sold them to a scrap collector for a small amount of money. One afternoon, as I continued packing my things, David appeared before me, holding 50 yuan in his hand. Here's your money. I took the money and nodded. Thank you. He looked at me with a complicated expression, his gaze drifting to the suitcase I was packing. I planned to have Elena go with me to Beijing with the army first. You don't need to keep packing. I didn't stop and nodded. He seemed uneasy with my attitude, unsure of how to handle it. What's wrong with you lately? You're like a different person. I turned my head impatiently, not wanting to engage. Although David didn't love me, if he discovered that Elena's name was on the marriage application, he might just renew our marriage for her sake. I had no intention of getting involved with that pair of scoundrels again. It's nothing. I just want to pack my things. When you go to Beijing, I'll move back to the countryside. He sighed in relief and explained, It's not that I'm not letting you go with me. It's just that Elena has never been to Beijing, and she wants to see it. I'll come get you in a few months. I nodded absent-mindedly. In my past life, he never came to get me for 8 years. It wasn't until Elena married a division commander that he finally took me to Beijing out of frustration. He seemed unaccustomed to me now, as I usually chattered whenever we were alone. Now, I barely spoke, and he grew restless. You've always wanted to take wedding photos, right? Let's go to the photo studio tomorrow. That wouldn't work. Tomorrow, I plan to buy supplies for university. Just as I was thinking of an excuse, Elena walked in, snuggling up to David's arm. David, what photo studio? I want to take photos too. David smiled and ruffled Elena's hair. All right, let's go tomorrow. You two go ahead. I have something to do tomorrow. He furrowed his brow. What could be more important than taking wedding photos? Go ahead and take the photos. I'll go with you to buy things afterward, I said firmly. His tone was resolute, leaving no room for refusal. Elena pouted. Are you not going because of me? I didn't want to argue further, so I agreed to go. Early the next morning, I heard David in Elena's room, coaxing her to get up. The bright red numbers on the calendar reminded me that there were only 4 days left. In 4 days, I would finally be free of this life. Just as I was about to lose patience, they slowly emerged from the room. David, ever so considerate, had prepared hot water and was personally washing Elena's face. I couldn't believe I'd been so blind in my previous life, thinking that if I married him, he would treat me the same way. Lost in thought, David awkwardly approached me, holding a ring in his hand. Neighbors say it's trendy to wear wedding rings now. I bought one for you. I didn't take it in my past life. There was no such ring. As soon as Elena saw it, she immediately pouted. It's so pretty. I want one too. I generously offered. You can have it. David's face darkened immediately. Stop joking. This is our wedding ring. Elena snatched the ring from him and slid it onto her finger, waving it in front of David. David, does it look good on me? David looked at Elena, his eyes full of affection, and smiled foolishly, nodding his head. Then, turning to me with a hint of guilt, he whispered, I'll buy you one next time. I nodded indifferently. I had heard his promises many times before, but none were ever kept. At the photo studio, Elena took the first set of photos, including several couple shots. When it was my turn with David, the photographer raised his camera only to awkwardly lower it. Sorry, the film is used up, he said. Inwardly, I rejoiced, but maintained a neutral expression. Oh, that's fine, I replied. After leaving the studio, David pulled a train ticket from his pocket and handed it to me. It was for a seat to Beijing, scheduled 4 days from now. I didn't mean to leave you behind, he said. I'll go ahead to settle in, and I'll be waiting for you in Beijing. It takes 3 days and nights to get to Beijing from here, and I couldn't understand how he thought I'd manage. Moreover, there was only one slot for a military spouse. Where would he have me stay? But asking now wouldn't yield a satisfying answer. When I accepted the ticket, David visibly relaxed. Don't worry, even if you don't stay in the military compound, you're still my only wife, he assured. I'll treat you well. I just consider Elena as a sister. I softened slightly at his words. How long had it been since I heard him speak so gently? Suddenly, a truck came around the corner, speeding straight toward us. David pulled Elena into his arms and dodged the vehicle. In the chaos, I was pushed. I froze, unable to move. As the car barreled toward me, it swerved at the last second, hitting me and dragging me along. Pain surged through me, and I felt dizzy, cold sweat beating on my forehead. The driver hurriedly jumped out, stammering, Miss, are you okay? A crowd gathered, pointing and murmuring. My gaze cut through the onlookers, fixing on David. He was comforting Elena, completely unaware of what had just happened to me. Or perhaps he noticed, and simply didn't care. I smiled bitterly, and the last shred of hesitation in my heart vanished. So this was what he meant by, I'll treat you well in the future. The driver took me to the hospital. After a series of checks, I learned I had only superficial wounds and some minor internal displacement. Lying in the hospital bed, my body ached, but my mind was strangely calm. Late into the night, David entered with a fatigued expression when he saw I was awake. He looked flustered for a moment. Rita, how are you feeling? Is it better? I gave him a cold look but said nothing. He rubbed his hands together, looking uneasy, and began to explain. Elena was a bit too scared, and I was with her the whole time. Under my gaze, he awkwardly fell silent. Rita, listened to me. The situation was urgent. Elena was closer to me, so I instinctively... He paused, seemingly searching for the right words. I didn't know you were going to get hit. I interrupted him. When are you going to Beijing? He hesitated. Tomorrow. All right. I need to rest. You can go now. I closed my eyes, signaling that I wanted to be left alone. David seemed like he wanted to say more, but ultimately left, sensing my discomfort. The next day, Mrs. Zhang arrived. She brought a thermos and wore a big smile. Rita, David asked me to come take care of you. How are you feeling now? Much better. Thank you, Mom. As she served me soup, she chattered on. David, that boy, he's so careless. I wonder if he'll be able to take care of Elena properly. She stopped midway, as if suddenly realizing something, and awkwardly fell silent. Mom, actually, it's Elena who married David. Mrs. Zhang froze. After a long pause, she finally reacted. What? What did you say? I listed Elena's name on the marriage application. Mrs. Zhang was initially stunned, then her face lit up with joy. Rita, you're such a good child. I knew you were the most sensible. She excitedly grasped my hand. Thank you for making this possible for them. I smiled faintly, but said nothing. Helping you? Mrs. Zhang questioned. No, it was helping myself. She had always favored Elena, even in the past life. No matter how hard I tried to serve her, in her old age, she still left all her inheritance to Elena. Mom, don't tell David or Elena about this yet. Mrs. Zhang grinned from ear to ear. All right, Mom understands. Then what are your plans for the future? In a few days, I'll be leaving. I didn't disclose my specific destination. Mrs. Zhang wanted to ask more, her mind full of their marriage issues. I closed my eyes, pretending to fall asleep on the day I was discharged from the hospital. I didn't notify anyone before I left. I wrote a letter to David. David, by the time you read this letter, I will already be on a train heading south. I know you've always liked Elena, and I'm letting you two be together. Our fate is over. I wish you both happiness. I sealed the letter, along with the Beijing train ticket and our marriage certificate, and sent them to Beijing. Dragging my suitcase to the train station, the air in the southern city was moist and warm. As I stood in front of the Shanghai campus, I felt a bit dazed. Walking through the campus, it felt as though I had been reborn. During the day, I attended classes diligently, absorbing knowledge. At night, I worked at a small restaurant, serving dishes, washing dishes, and feeling the exhaustion grounding me. A month later, I had gradually adapted to this busy but fulfilling life. Then, one day, I saw David downstairs at the dormitory. Rita, why did you do this? Why did you put Elena's name on the marriage application? Why didn't you go to Beijing? His tone was filled with anger and confusion. I looked at him coldly. I don't want to live with someone else's husband in my heart. It's disgusting. Unbearable. He stared at me in disbelief. How can you say such things? You weren't like this before. I turned my face away, my stomach churning with nausea. I didn't want to look at him, not for a second. David, I just want to focus on my studies and start a new life. Elena is the one you've always wanted, right? You two should cherish each other. Please don't disturb me anymore. He angrily ran his hands through his hair. What nonsense are you talking about? I've always treated Elena like a sister. I sneered. What kind of siblings hug each other and steal kisses? I had once caught him kissing a sleeping Elena. That tender expression on his face, I would never forget. His face flashed with shame, but then he grew furious. Rita, stop spouting nonsense. Elena and I are completely innocent. The sibling love you talk about is disgusting to me. Let me go. And let yourself go too. His face darkened, but he didn't know what to say. I remembered when I first arrived at the Zhang family as a child, fearing dependency on others. I was so scared that on nights when hunger overwhelmed me, I would secretly sneak out to eat leaves from the garden. David saw me, he shared his snacks and comforted me, saying, Rita, don't be afraid. I'll protect you from now on. That warmth made me fall for him. step by step. So, in my past life, even though David didn't love me at first, I was willing to marry him. In the following days, David still lingered around the school. I deliberately avoided him, not wanting any more dealings. But I didn't expect him to go to the principal and demand my expulsion. When I was called into the principal's office, David was sitting stiffly. Principal, I request Rita's expulsion. I was furious. David, what do you think you're doing? Why are you asking for my expulsion? I want you to come back with me. He stood up and walked toward me, reaching out to take my hand. I quickly stepped back, avoiding his touch. Go back? Go back and continue watching you and Elena all over each other? His expression froze. Rita, don't be ridiculous. We're still married. How is it right for you to run off to the south and stay away from me like this? I almost couldn't hold back my laughter at his shamelessness. David, your wife is Elena. The marriage certificate has her name on it. And the person you're thinking of is also her. His face darkened, gritting his teeth. That was a mistake. Mistakes should be corrected. My past behavior made you misunderstand. I won't act like that anymore. My heart sank. These familiar lines echoed my previous life. And what happened? He immediately reverted to being sweet with Elena. I turned to the principal and spoke earnestly. Principal, I really want to continue studying here. Please don't expel me. The principal looked at me, then at David, and after a brief pause, said, Mr. Zhang, since you have no relationship with Rita, you are not authorized to handle her expulsion. I finally breathed a sigh of relief. David wanted to say something, but the principal interrupted. Mr. Zhang, if there's nothing else, please leave. I have work to do. In the following days, David continued to haunt me. I was exhausted from his constant pursuit, and my studies were being affected. What made things even more troublesome was that Elena had also arrived. David, please, let's go back and get a divorce. I don't want this. I don't want to steal my sister's husband. I'm a bad person. Elena tugged at David's sleeve, crying in fits. David, with a heart full of sympathy, pulled her into his arms and gently patted her back. Elena, don't cry. It's not your fault. We'll go back right away. It's my fault for making you suffer. Elena, looking pitiful, pretended to kneel down. Sister, I'm sorry. Please don't be angry with David. I know it was a misunderstanding between David and me. Don't kneel. It's my fault for making you suffer. We'll go back now. As she said this, she shot me a glare, her eyes accusing me of being unreasonable. A crowd of students gathered around, whispering and pointing fingers. I couldn't be bothered to watch this drama anymore, so I turned and left. If they want to put on a show, let them. I have no intention of playing along. Elena certainly had some influence. David didn't come back that day. I threw myself into my studies and joined the school's math club, where I met Sam. He was tall and thin, wearing a pair of black-rimmed glasses, and had a sunny smile. He excelled in math and often helped guide me. Over time, we became more familiar. Just when I thought my life was finally on track, David's letters started arriving one after another, persistent as ever. Rita, are you still angry with me? I know I was wrong. Come back. Rita, Elena's pregnant. Come back. Rita, Elena's pregnant. The child is mine. I know it's hard for you to accept, but please believe me. You're the only one in my heart, Rita. There should be a limit to your anger. What do I need to do for you to forgive me? I tore his letters into pieces and threw them in the trash. I didn't know what made him think I would change my mind. Maybe he just had thick skin. The smell of oil and smoke filled the air at the part-time restaurant as I quickly cleaned the tables. I looked up and saw Sam sitting in the corner. He smiled at me, and I quickly averted my gaze and continued working. After my shift ended, he was still sitting there with several untouched dishes in front of him. Come eat with me. He gestured to the seat across from him. I've already eaten. I tried to decline, but my stomach betrayed me with a loud growl. He chuckled softly. Don't be shy. Come sit down. Unable to resist his hospitality, I sat down across from him. A clay pot filled with hot soup bubbled away, and the warmth drove the chill from my body. I dug in, completely ignoring my self-consciousness. Slow down. No one's going to steal your food. Halfway through eating, I suddenly felt an itch at the tip of my nose. When I looked up, I saw Sam smiling at me, holding a grain of rice in his hand. Do you want to eat my face too? He teased. I blushed, quickly lowering my head. I knew he liked me. His eyes made it very clear. But right now, all I wanted to do was focus on my studies. Everything else could wait. The winter holidays arrived, and Mrs. Zhang called me repeatedly, urging me to come home for the new year. After all, they had raised me, and I couldn't be too heartless. After much thought, I bought a ticket and, carrying a bag full of gifts, returned to East City. As soon as I entered the Zhang family's gate, I heard a sharp voice yelling, "David, what's going on? I'm telling you, I'm pregnant with your child. I'm not here to be mistreated." I froze, only to see Elena, her large belly swollen, shouting at David. David's face turned pale, but he didn't dare to argue. He could only appease her in a low voice. "Elena, calm down. The doctor said you can't get too emotional. It's bad for the baby." "I want that coat. Go buy it for me right now." "Elena, I'll get it for you next time, okay? This month's allowance is all gone." David carefully helped Elena sit down. "You're useless. Still just a lieutenant colonel. You're not even giving the money to your sister?" David's expression darkened. "Elena, stop talking nonsense. I've already cut ties with her." "Cut ties? Do you think I'm stupid? You write to her every now and then. Do you think I don't know? You don't have me in your heart at all. All you think about is her." Elena cried and screamed, pounding her fists against David's chest. David, looking impatient, said, "I told you I didn't do anything." I stood at the door, watching the scene before me, feeling nothing but absurdity and laughter. In my past life, he hid his contact with Elena from me. In this life, he was hiding his letters to me from Elena. In the end, he was just someone who wanted to have it both ways, never truly loyal. Mrs. Zhang was the first to notice me. "Rita, you're back. Come help talk to Elena. Her temper's getting worse." She grabbed my hand, her tone somewhat ingratiating. I pulled my hand back and said indifferently, "I'm tired. I'll go rest in my room first." Mrs. Zhang froze for a moment but didn't say anything further. She turned and continued to coax Elena in a low voice. She was so different from the domineering woman I remembered. Back in my room, I dug out the New Year's gift Sam had given me from my luggage, a red cashmere scarf. I wrapped the scarf around my neck and glanced at myself in the mirror, a smile tugging at my lips without my noticing. That evening, I heard a knock on the door. I opened it to find David standing outside, looking haggard and uneasy. "Rita, can we talk?" I stepped aside to let him in. He rubbed his hands together, gathering courage as he said, "Rita, the wife I've always wanted is you. I've been waiting for you. Elena's temper's getting worse, and she's spending money recklessly." I couldn't help but scoff. "Waiting for me? David, do you even believe your own words? You've been waiting for me while letting Elena get pregnant with your child. What exactly do you think I am?" His face flushed red, his eyes full of panic. "Rita, let me explain." I interrupted him. "There's nothing to explain. You and Elena already have a child. What else is there to say? I wish you both a happy life and an early arrival of your child." He remained silent for a few seconds, as though recalling something. "I've been having dreams lately. Dreams where the woman I marry is you. You're gentle and virtuous, always taking care of my parents back in the old house." He paused, his tone tinged with pain. "But in the dream, my heart belongs to Elena. I neglected you, hurt you. I'm such a jerk. And then my son and I were pressuring you to divorce." I was shocked. He had actually dreamed of our past lives. Covering his face in distress, he continued, "I'm sorry for how I treated you then. I want to make it up to you." Suppressing my fury, I spoke coldly. "If you really want to make up for it, then go live your life with Elena. Stop coming to bother me. It'll be better for both of us sisters." His gaze dimmed, and there was a trace of reluctance in his voice. "But I still feel like you should be my wife." My patience finally ran out, and I firmly said, "David, it's time for you to go. These aren't the words you should be saying, nor the place you should be." He stood up despondently and walked out of my room with heavy steps. I watched his retreating back, feeling no emotions stirring inside me. In both lives, he had always wavered between two women, greedily wanting to have it all. The next morning, I packed my things and knocked on Mrs. Zhang's door. I handed her a bank card, saying calmly, "Thank you for taking care of me all these years. This card contains the money I've saved over the years. Consider it my way of repaying your kindness in raising me." Mrs. Zhang froze for a moment, trying to refuse. "Rita, this really isn't necessary." "Take it," I said, lifting my luggage. "I've got some things to handle at school, so I'm leaving now." Without looking back, I walked out of the Zhang family home, feeling no attachment. At the ticket window, the line was long, and when it was finally my turn, there were no more tickets to South City. Checking again, the next available ticket wouldn't be until the day after tomorrow. Frustrated, I ran my fingers through my hair. Where could I go now? I can't sleep on the streets. Just as I was at a loss, Sam appeared in front of me, carrying bags. "Rita!" His face lit up with a surprised smile as he quickly approached. I was equally surprised, smiling as I greeted him. "Sam, what a coincidence. Are you from East City too?" "Yes," he replied. "And you, do you have nowhere to go?" His tone was filled with concern. "Then how about you come spend the new year at my place?" I froze for a moment, quickly waving my hands. "I couldn't possibly." He smiled and said, "What's the big deal? It's just me and my grandmother at home. It's pretty quiet. You'll liven things up a bit. Plus, I can't leave you alone during the new year. I'd be worried." He paused and then added, "Please, Rita, think of it as keeping my lonely grandmother company. She's all alone at home, and it's so boring for her." He put on a pitiful expression, making me unable to hold back a laugh and unable to refuse his hospitality. I finally agreed. As soon as I stepped out of the station, a cold breeze hit me, and I instinctively pulled my coat tighter around myself. Seeing this, Sam immediately took off his coat and draped it over my shoulders. A faint woody fragrance lingered in the air, filling my senses. "Cold, isn't it? East City is much colder than South City," he said. I shook my head, though a warm feeling surged in my heart. Sam's home was in the old district of SS City, a quaint two-story house full of character. As soon as we entered the yard, the smell of delicious dumplings filled the air. An elderly woman with silver hair stood at the kitchen door, smiling as she looked at us. "Sam, you're back. And this is—" Her gaze fell on me, and she smiled brightly. "Well, well, looks like you've brought home a beautiful lady this year." I couldn't help but lower my head, a slight blush coloring my cheeks. "Grandma." "This is Rita," Sam introduced with a smile. "My friend." "Good, good, good. Come in and warm up." Grandma Sam was busy cooking dumplings. Sam helped carry my luggage to the guest room. The guest room wasn't big, but it was clean and tidy. The bedding had the comforting smell of sunshine. "You rest for a while, the dumplings will be ready soon," Sam said gently as he set down the suitcase. I nodded and sat on the edge of the bed, gazing out at the falling snow. A sense of peace and tranquility, like never before, filled my heart. Perhaps this was what it felt like to be at home. That evening, we sat around the dining table, enjoying the steaming dumplings. Grandma Sam kept serving me more food. "Rita, you should come here often. You're always welcome at my place," she said warmly. I smiled and nodded, my heart full of warmth. After dinner, Sam suggested we take a walk in the nearby park. The park was nearly empty in the winter, with only a few couples nestled together, enjoying the rare peace. We walked slowly along the lake, neither of us speaking. The snow gently fell, covering us like a thin veil. "Thank you, Sam." I broke the silence, speaking softly. "Thank me for what?" "Thank you for taking me in, for giving me a warm place to stay." Sam looked at me and teasingly said, "Then, how about you show your gratitude by becoming my girlfriend?" I froze for a moment, then playfully snorted. "Dream on, though," I replied. A slight ripple stirred in my heart. "Then tell me, how should you repay me? After all, I'm the hero who rescued you from the troubled waters at the station." I couldn't help but laugh at his dramatic words and feigned seriousness. "A hero? I think you're trying to extort me," I said, pretending to scold him. He pretended to think for a moment and then, with great seriousness, said, "Let me think. How about you cook for me every day until school starts?" I couldn't help but roll my eyes. "You wish, my cooking is nothing special." He smiled, his eyes twinkling. No worries, I'm not picky. And even if your cooking's bad, I'll eat it all. His cheeky attitude made me laugh despite myself. Is this how you show gratitude? It looks more like you're trying to take advantage of me. Aw, looks like my charm isn't enough. He sighed dramatically, then suddenly leaned in closer. Then maybe I should try harder? I felt my cheeks flush and quickly stepped back. Why, you don't get any ideas. Seeing me flustered, he couldn't help but laugh. Just kidding, he said, reaching out to gently ruffle my hair. Let's go back. Grandma must be worried. Back at Sam's house, Grandma Sam had already prepared hot ginger soup, saying it would help drive away the cold. I held the ginger soup in my hands, savoring the warmth. For the first time, I felt a glimmer of hope for the future. Maybe letting go of the past and starting over wasn't such a bad thing. On New Year's Eve, the sky outside was lit up with brilliant fireworks, illuminating the entire night. The deafening sound of firecrackers echoed in the air. I stood by the window, feeling as if I were in a different world. Happy New Year, Rita. He was standing very close to me, and his warm breath brushed against my ear, sending a tingling sensation through me. I turned around and met his deep gaze. In that instant, time seemed to freeze, and my heart skipped a beat. Happy New Year, Sam, I whispered back. He leaned in closer, his voice soft as he said, I like you, Rita. The fireworks continued to explode in the sky, their dazzling colors reflecting on my face and on Sam's.